Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com. This is the second part of my series showing how the press creates completely fake climate and energy stories. Here's one from today. Arctic sea ice under threat, update 2. The NASA Worldview satellite image below shows Arctic sea ice in a poor condition on June 16, 2023, all the way up to the North Pole, on the bottom left of the image below. There's open water near the Franz Josef Archipelago, some 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole on the right side of the image below. They want you to believe that this is something unusual, it's leading to a catastrophe, and it's caused by the burning of fossil fuels. Let's take a look and see what's actually going on. Arctic sea ice extent is almost identical to what it was on this date 17 years ago in 2006. The Franz Josef Archipelago is shown in the red circles on the two diagrams. There's little difference in the ice there now as there was 17 years ago, but one place that is different is Svalbard. 17 years ago there was little or no ice around Svalbard, but there's quite a bit of ice now. And in 1922 there was no ice around Svalbard all winter long. Svalbard is also called Spitsbergen. This map from 1922 shows conditions around Svalbard at that time. The black area shows the extent of the ice. You can see there was no ice surrounding Svalbard that winter. This is a close-up of the 1922 map, and this is the current map. You can see that there's more ice now around Svalbard than there was 100 years ago. In 1922, explorer Stephenson reported that the ice between the North Pole and Alaska was young, thin, rotten, moving ice. He devoted much of his time to trying to clear up misconceptions about the Arctic climate. His agenda was to convince people that aviation routes over the Arctic were going to be the way people traveled in the future, and he was correct. He pointed out that temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 38 degrees Celsius have been recorded north of the Arctic Circle. Here's a quote from Stephenson from 1922. No thoughtful person will therefore suppose that transpolar air journeys will in summer be interfered with by low temperatures. Let's take a closer look at Earth's climate 100 years ago. In 1921, there was a massive solar storm which was associated with a worldwide heat wave and drought. The solar storm created an aurora which was plainly visible in Austin, Texas. The drought caused starvation in Eastern Europe, Russia, and much of Asia. Here's an appeal from Save the Children dated August 4, 1921. Grim tragedy of famine-stricken Russia. Millions of babes slowly and painfully dying from starvation, the worst disaster in history. Switzerland's Lake Morad dried up completely, and this is what that same lake looks like now. Here's an article from the San Francisco Examiner dated October 16, 1921. Science and Our Worldwide Upset Weather. The astonishing theory that the disastrous heat and drought of the summer were due to our solar system passing through a vast, unseen cosmic cloud at a time when sunspots were hottest. The New York Times described it as freak weather and said it was manifested in a worldwide heat wave of unusual length and intensity. In 1921, England was gripped by an extraordinary drought which lasted all year long. October 1921 brought unprecedented heat to London. Temperatures on October 6th reached 84 degrees Fahrenheit. A couple of weeks after the solar storm in May 1921, Pueblo, Colorado was hit with one of the deadliest floods in U.S. history. 100 years ago in 1923, it was reported that Glacier National Park was melting so quickly that the ice would be gone by the year 1950. But the ice is still there, and over the last 30 years, the glaciers in Glacier National Park have either been stable or they've been growing. As of 1999, NASA showed that 1921 was the second hottest year on record in the United States after 1934, but they've since altered the data to cool 1921 and 1934 way down. By tampering with the data, NASA turned a long-term cooling trend in the United States into a warming trend. In 2011, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration showed that 1921 was the hottest year on record in Texas, but they've also tampered with the data to cool 1921 way down. By tampering with the data, the U.S. government turned a cooling trend in Texas into a warming trend. In 1922, it was reported that northern Norway was experiencing unprecedented tropical heat. Tromsø, for 6 weeks, has experienced temperatures ranging from 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. In 1927, a group of motorists journeyed 270 miles north of the Arctic Circle, prepared for freezing weather. To their continued astonishment, the temperature was never less than 90 degrees in the shade. The intention was to reach the Arctic Ocean, but 40 miles of melted permafrost on the coast prevented this. An average of 210 miles a day was made on the journey, which was arduous in the extreme, and at one time the car had an actual race with death among the forest fires in Sweden over terrible roads. It shouldn't surprise anyone that the Arctic gets hot in midsummer, because they receive more solar radiation than any place else on Earth at that time. We know that there was a worldwide heat wave and drought around the year 1921. We know that the Arctic was melting very quickly. We know that Glacier National Park was melting very quickly. But NASA shows 1921 as being one of the coldest years on record. Compare the current official temperature record now to what it was like in 1989. In 1989, the U.S. government knew that 1921 was hot. Tom Carl, the head of climate analysis of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, said, "Analysis of warming since 1881 shows most of the increase in global temperature happened before 1919, before the more recent sharp rise in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. While global climate warmed overall since 1881, it actually cooled from 1921 to 1979. But the U.S. government has since rewritten and reversed both trends. Now they show cooling before 1919 and warming from 1921 to 1979. Let's go back and look at the original article once again, which says there's open water not far from the Franz Josef Archipelago, and they say that that's due to the burning of fossil fuels. But in 1971, National Geographic showed essentially no ice around the Franz Josef Archipelago. And that was at a time when the United States and the Soviet Union were mounting large-scale investigations to determine why the Arctic climate was becoming more frigid, why parts of the Arctic sea ice had recently become ominously thicker, and whether the extent of that ice cover contributes to the onset of ice ages. Also in 1971, NASA's leading climate expert predicted a disastrous new ice age 50 or 60 years in the future, which means it could have started 2 years ago. This story is typical fake, baseless propaganda from the press. They take a single data point, try to convince their readers that it's something unusual, and blame climate change caused by the burning of fossil fuels. Arctic sea ice extent today is almost identical to what it was 17 years ago. And there's been essentially no trend in Arctic sea ice over the last 17 years. There's more sea ice now than there was in 2007 when Al Gore at the Nobel Prize ceremony predicted an ice-free Arctic by the year 2014.
Another new study to be presented by U.S. Navy researchers later this week warns it could happen in as little as 7 years. 7 years from now. In the last few months, it has been harder and harder to misinterpret the signs that our world is spinning out of kilter.
There's about the same amount of Arctic sea ice now as there was in 2009 when Joe Biden's climate czar, John Kerry, predicted an ice-free Arctic by the year 2014.
You have sea ice, which is melting at a rate that the Arctic Ocean now increasingly is exposed. In 5 years, scientists predict we will have the first ice-free Arctic summer.
The BBC said the Arctic would be ice-free by 2013. Al Gore said 2014. The Sierra Club said 2013. In 2008, Norway's leading expert predicted an ice-free Arctic that summer. That was 15 years ago. Mark Cerise of the National Snow and Ice Data Center in Boulder, Colorado, predicted the North Pole would be ice-free during the summer of 2008. The bottom line is that the press, academia, and government work together to create completely fake stories which they use for propaganda purposes. Robert Kennedy Jr. explained recently how this works. He said, "You pay experts enough money, a lot of them will say whatever you want them to say." Toto has been pulling back the curtain on the climate scam for the past 15 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki Upla, and the 4 new puppies on the web at realclimatescience.com.